Hi everyone, this is Bob Bickle. I'm going to try something a little bit different. I'm going to call this series Oil Painting and Stuff. And here I find myself in Pixabay again. In the past I've downloaded an image from this that I really enjoy painting. I've done gouache watercolor paintings of this image. I've also done oil paint palette knife painting, but I have not just done a oil painting of it. So let me pull the image up. Now here we find 8 pages of old buildings. And the one I'm interested in is this one right here. This image I find so intriguing. It's just gorgeous. So I'm going to download it again. So I come over to free download, and it's at the right pixel density that I need. So I'll download it to my computer. It's downloaded, so I'm going to pull up another program. This is Grid Drawing Tool by Art Tutor. So I'm going to upload that image of that mansion. Now, one thing I find about this image is that the building on the right, which I believe is a silo, is almost to the top edge, top margin of the image. So that would make my most important direction the height. So knowing that this program generates from a lower left-hand corner, I'm going to have to rotate this image. So I come up here to rotate. I'm going to rotate left. Now I'm going to put this on a 12 by 16 canvas panel. And I don't want a lot of grid squares on my canvas. So I'm going to make the grid squares 2 inches square. So on a 12-inch rise, that'll be 6 squares. And on a 16th wide, that'll be 8 squares, hopefully. So I come over here to step 5, grid, boxes wide 6, line color black, line pixel width 1, apply grid. Now we have 6 grids high and 8 grids wide. Doesn't often happen that way, but we nailed this one. So I'm going to download this to my computer. Okay, it's downloaded. These are the oil paints that I use. They are Winsor Newton Griffin alkyd paints. They range in color from Limson Crimson, Cad Yellow Light, Cerulean Blue, Ultramarine, Burn Umber, and Lamp Black, and Titanium White. And as a side color, purple. It's amazing amount of purple I actually use in a painting. Now, these two here, this is an acrylic paint. It's burnt sienna, and I use this as an undercoating for my oil paints, and I apply it with this disposable foam brush. Now let me show you some of my other equipment. Well, these are a selection of brushes that I use. I don't normally use the traditional oil paint brushes. What I do use is an acrylic brush. I find that it's not quite as hard as all brushes and not as flimsy as watercolor brushes. These are all synthetic fibers, and they range from size from a number 1, which I believe is a 1 inch, and I have a 1/2 inch flat and a 3/8 angle, a 1/4 inch dagger. I use this a lot, and 1/4 inch flat, a 0 round, and a 0 script liner. Now these brushes are Master's Touch. You can get them at Hobby Lobby. I found that this brand, Master's Touch, is very good brushes if you can get them in the acrylic class. The long handle is not important because I use what they call a maul stick. This goes over the top of my board, and I can rest my hand on top of it when I'm doing a painting. Now for canvases, I use Master's Touch from Hobby Lobby. This happens to be a 12 by 16 panel. I like these panels. They're everything I need. Next, I have a Odorless Mineral Spirits by Gamblin. This is called Gamsol. This is my, I would say, my one and only by choice thinner for my oil paints. I very seldom use liquid because I find that when you use this and liquid that you thin the paint, but you also reduce the pigment load. And this is not truly necessary, but once I've finished a painting session, I clean my brush in mineral spirits, and rather than washing them with soap and water, once I use mineral spirits on my brush and clean them, I dip in this baby oil, and it saves my brushes from becoming stiff until my next session, and then I just wash this off my brushes with mineral spirits. I like using this. Now, as far as washing my brushes, I have this jar. It's called a brush tank, a Mona Lisa. You can buy this at Hobby Lobby. I fill it with odorless mineral spirits, and it's got a screen in the bottom of this container that you can wipe your brush over top of it, and it cleans your brushes. The next item would be a drawing platform. This happens to be a 16 by 24 raisable drawing table that you can purchase in Amazon, which that's where I purchased it. I modified it to sit on my drawing table. It's got two hinges mounted on the front edge, and I can tilt it up to any height I want. And over top of it, I have a plastic tablecloth that I cut up and put over top of it. Now, as far as a palette, I have a old watercolor palette that I use. This is a Masters Stay Wet watercolor palette. In the past, I went to another system of storing my watercolor paints, and now I use this for my oil paint palette. And in the center of this, I have disposable palette paper that I put my paints on. These palette papers come in a tablet that you can get also at Hobby Lobby. I have a small palette knife. I don't do much painting with this, but one thing I do use it for is to mix my paint. I try to get in the habit of mixing my paint with a palette knife rather than a brush, because by transferring your different colors with a brush, you impregnate your pile of paints with uh, other pigment that you probably shouldn't be in that pile of paints. Um, I would like to say I use this all the time, but that's not the case. I should get in the habit of using this more often. Now, one thing you might want to consider is a brush organizer. This is my watercolor paint brush organizer, and right now I put my oil painting brush in a tall mason cup. This is a pair of pliers that's been around longer than I have. It's a pair of my father's pliers. They're indispensable for loosening up your paint tubes so you can get your paint out. Paper towels. These happen to be Viva. I like Viva in that they are lint free, so you don't have to worry about putting lint on your paintings. I really like these towels. Now, one other thing you would probably need is a carry-all to carry your projects from point to point. If you do plein air, it's nice to have a carry-all to carry your paints and your mineral spirits. Now, if you were to go with these alkyd paints, now the reason I picked this Winsor Newton Griffin is these colors more or less dry overnight. And I gave you a starter series of colors that you need to start out with as far as your painting journey. This color happens to be Indian red. Now, the more painting you do, when you drift away from those standard starter set colors, you start getting a collection of paints that make it easier or faster for you to get where you want to go as far as the color you want to achieve. Now, this Indian red, you could probably take linseed crimson and burn umber and get very close to this color. That starter set of colors I showed you will more or less get you where you need to go as far as any painting you do. One thing you do need with this Griffin alkyd paints is ventilation. This alkyd binder that they have in this is really whiffy, and when you first start using it, it can be overpowering. So please use adequate ventilation for this stuff. When I tell you it's whiffy, it is. It's something else. Now this is that picture we got off of Pixabay of that old building. And when I called this up in Pixabay, what I used to call this picture up was mansion. M-A-N-S-I-O-N. And under that you'll find this picture. Now what I did was I put a 2x2 grid square on this lightly with a pencil. And then I went ahead and I drew this picture on this grid layout using that grid tool that I use from Art Tutor. And then I sprayed it with a workable fixative. This Krylon workable fixative is for pencils, pastels, and charcoal. It's an acrylic, I do believe. And you can have acrylic paints underneath oil paints. You can't have acrylics on top of oil paints because of the shrinkage factor. Your oil paints dry a lot slower than your acrylics, and there would be a cracking issue on the surface of your painting. So it's all right to have acrylics underneath your oil paints, but not vice versa. Now what I'll do with this picture is, now that the fixative is on it, I will go with my acrylic burnt sienna and my disposable brush. I just use a container. This happens to be my watercolor container, and I put the paint on the lid, and I put some water in this, and then I just moisten my disposable brush here, dip it in that paint, and I paint across this with a light coat of acrylic paint. Now the reason I put the fixative over top of my pencil drawing is so that when I paint my acrylic on, I don't lift up that graphite from my drawing surface. Now I just want to put this on kind of thin. I want to get more or less my brush strokes out of this stuff before it dries, and this thin, it will dry quickly. Now I'm trying to get at least the bubbles from the paint off the surface. Now the reason I do this is because I'm not fighting with that white underneath the painting. Now one thing in art, I'm always on the internet and always on YouTube trying to learn something different. And I learned something the other day, or I hope you can see this. That little square there on the back of this Griffin, and that is black. And here's another tube, and the little square is clear. The clear square means transparent, and the black square means opaque. So this, you cannot see through it, and this being transparent, you can see through it. Now once this is dry, I'll proceed to block in my oil painting. Now what I mean by blocking in is that I want to get my base color. Now what I mean by base, it is the color in the background that I will be painting over top of. And I normally paint from back to front, distance to foreground, dark to light. Now, sometimes you deviate from that. I hate to say it's a rule, but it's a system I follow. There are certain rules in the art world that need to be broken. For instance, competition. I see a lot of artists on the internet espousing as to the composition of the oil painting, when it all gets down to two things. The rule of thirds, where you put your most predominant object or object of interest in your points of thirds on your picture, and you don't put your horizon in the center of your work platform. those are the only two rules I follow for my art composition. You can get into all kinds of theories and stuff. Things like ratio, the golden rule ratio, and stuff like that. If you follow the rules of thirds and you don't put your horizon on the middle of your platform, you're good to go. Enough said about that. Now I'll just wait until this thing dries and we'll start another video. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you learned something from it. Yeah, if you did, please subscribe and give me a like. And till we meet again, I hope you do well. Until then, bye now.